So hello everyone, and this is already the 7th session or the 6th session of our course, and we're talking about error correction and assessment and feedback. And in today's session, if you have any questions on videos, please ask them, and then we'll go to the points about error correction, and then we'll talk about how to give feedback on speaking. Then we'll go to writing, and we'll discuss the principles of effective assessment. So the virtual microphone goes to Sally. Please.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I see a mistake. It's session 6, I believe, on that very first
session
slide.
6. It's session 6, I'm sure, because all the materials are for session 6.
Right, and I forgot to put 6, so that's a mistake. I didn't do a good job of proofreading my slides. I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay. As with past sessions, I know much of what we're going to go over today is probably review, but as we also said the last time, it's good to refresh our memories about some of these things, and I hope you will add anything that you that comes to mind, especially with such a small group, to what we see on the slides. So I guess that one thing to remember, one key point is that views on error correction, because I'm going to be presenting some views, but views on error correction are influenced by our past learning experience, our training, cultural expectations of a teacher's role, our students' personalities, and parental influence. And I know I've taught in a number of countries, and I can really see differences based on any one of these factors. And perhaps sometimes we need to explain our views on error correction to our students and maybe to parents if we're working with children, to help, especially if what we're doing is not exactly what is the norm, excuse me, in the culture where we are teaching. Excuse me, I haven't even started talking and I've lost my voice. We often talk about errors and mistakes, and we use these words interchangeably. I know I do, but technically in the language literature, there is a difference. Errors are a result of interference from L1 or overgeneralization, or quite often not a complete knowledge being at a certain stage in the language learning process, or maybe a very complex part of language, or maybe fossilization for some of our older students, and maybe not even older students. And errors aren't easy to correct. On the other hand, mistakes are. I made a mistake on that first slide. I forgot to, I took the slide from the previous presentation, erased the number, and then I forgot. Memory lapse. I have a lot of those these days. To put the number back, so the correct number in. So mistakes can be caused by memory lapses, slips of the tongue, just not paying attention, doing something too quickly. Haste makes waste. And so we should expect our students to try to correct those. But we probably need to give them the time and a little push to correct those mistakes. Okay. I have an article by a man named Doug Lemov, and I really don't know that much about him, except that he is a teacher trainer in New York for kindergarten through 12, K through 12 teachers, and he's an author. And the reason I know a little about him is because I read one of his articles and I really liked it. I put it aside. And his article was about building a culture of error in the classroom. And now this is for American teachers, K through 12 teachers. And he had several points that he was trying to make in his article. And the first one was that errors are to be expected. And we talked about this the last time, and we all know this. I mean, we've all learned language, another language. Everyone here has learned at least one other language, probably more. And we know that in order to learn the language, you have to go through certain stages, you make errors. So we have to expect them of our students. And one thing I liked about his article was he gave some phrases to support his ideas. So he says errors are to be expected. And he gives us some language to use, for example, in a whole class discussion. If the students have done a reading and we're discussing it as a whole group and they make some mistakes, oops. He gives some example phrases. Since my voice is crackly and we have so few people, would someone read that first example phrase for us? Janina, could you read that, please? That
yes,
first phrase?
From the list?
Yes, please.
Okay. I am really glad that you made that mistake. It's going to help me to help you.
Okay. Ooh, thank you. Now I feel good about my mistake. Raisa, do you want to read the second one? You need to turn on your microphone.
Wrong answers are really helpful because we learn from the mistakes we make.
Okay. And what about that third one? Natasha, are you able to read that? I don't know about your connection.
Yes. Which of these options do you think is my favorite wrong answer?
Okay. So thank you. I think I taught intermediate and advanced students for many years, most recently. And I think they would understand the first two. I think the last one might confuse them a little bit. I might have to word it differently. But what do you think about these expressions? Are they expressions you would use? Are these phrases?
May I? For me, it's like a great idea to involve the learners into the process because when they are not given the correct answer, but when they have the time to go back and understand what their mistake was caused by, it's a really great chance to involve the learners into the learning process.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's move
Thank-
on. Oh,
Okay.
yes, please go ahead, Raisa. Was that
Well,
Raisa?
just when I start teaching a new group, traditionally it is the fourth year students, and very often they keep silence just when I ask them to speak. And the reason is that they are really afraid to speak. They're afraid of making mistakes. And I often say, just almost every lesson, I tell the following thing, that it is better to start speaking with mistakes than to pretend to be clever, wise, keeping silence. Well, and some of them are shy, yeah? And they start, this feeling of safety is very important. Just I never interrupt them. I usually note down the mistakes and never name who makes such mistakes. and just put them down on the board or just on the screen now, yeah? And I attract the attention to this or that moment and give some similar situations, just then we make sentences, explain, and they understand that it is really safe to speak and to get additional information, and then to be able to correct that. And one more thing, I when I ask my students to be attentive, to be active listeners when somebody speaks, then to pay attention to somebody's mistakes. And for example, somebody says, I come home, yeah? I do not let them to pronounce that wrong variant. Say, a word or verb come was pronounced in the wrong way. So the only one variant, because when we say you said come, but you should pronounce come, then two variants again, which one to choose and which one to remember. And you know that just every time when we start doing such things step by step, it works, it helps them to feel more confident in speaking, not to be shy, not to be afraid of making mistakes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I think one reason his article really grabbed me was because I taught in Japan for 3 years. And in Japan, in the classroom, there is a culture of no error. You don't volunteer an answer unless you are absolutely sure it's correct. And in general, you don't raise your hand in Japan. You just let the teacher talk. And so when I taught in Japan, Marina used this word crippled in a past slide by overcorrection. My students were crippled. They were terrified. They would not raise their hand. They would not, and so I had to start out by saying, if you want to try to answer, look at me and smile. Because I'd try to smile at them a lot. They just could not raise their hands. And so they started smiling, but they truly were so well trained not to speak up, that in the speaking classes which I was teaching, it was a huge challenge. And so there was a culture of no error. So I think his article, A Culture of Error, really, really spoke to me. Okay, let's go on, because he had some other points and other phrases. He also suggests, not only should we expect errors, but that we shouldn't ask a student for the right answer. Who has the right answer? No, we shouldn't do that. We should ask students for their answer. And if they give us a wrong answer, not say that's wrong, here's the answer, but to get as many answers as we can and to try to get the students to give justification or to give an explanation of why they think their answer is a good answer. Now he gave some phrases for this. He gave some phrases for this point as well, but these phrases for my students might be a little bit challenging. Let's see. Would somebody read that first phrase? Maya, is that Maya?
Yeah, Maya has joined.
Maya, are you able to read that first phrase for us? Or maybe Maya's not.
She tried to join several times, so maybe your connection. Okay. So well, we have Helena as well.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Helena, happy to see you.
Yeah, glad to see you too.
Helena.
Thank you.
Oh, hi.
You mean this example phrases on the slide, yeah?
Yeah, just read that first example for us and give people a chance to read.
Okay. For the 4 options to this question, yeah, I'll try, though it is small in my phone. For the 4 options to this question, I don't want to begin by asking which one you think is right, because I want to focus on the explanations that we have.
Okay, so the teacher,
number
here,
one.
the phrase here is explaining why. I'm not going to tell you right away. So as we said, sometimes we need to explain to our students how we're giving feedback or how we're correcting. Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Janina, and do that second one for us, please.
I see several students picked answer choice X and that several other picked answer choice Y. Can I defend my answer whether I picked X or Y?
Okay, so here again, we're not saying X is correct. For those of you who had X, X is the correct answer. But, and again, this helps the teacher understand better why they made the choices they did. Okay, so we have 2 points that he's trying to make home and trying to drive home and trying to give us some language to use in the classroom. Again, we might have to adjust that language for our level of students. Shall we go on to the next one? Okay, and finally, we've said this too, and you know this, and he's saying encouraging risk-taking is also important. He gives us 3 possible phrases that he feels encourages risk-taking. Raisi, you want to read that first one?
Just a second. Okay, I love the fact that this is a hard question and that I see so many brave hands in the air. Thank you for taking the risk.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward. And I find myself often thanking students for raising their hand when I see that there's a lot of hesitation. Okay, how about that second one? Maya, are you there now? Oh, okay, I understand. I'm sorry to hear you have the flu. We'll skip over you. Helena?
Yeah, with pleasure. I had one today very similar to this. People have debated this question for centuries. You even know there is, if there is a right answer. What's important is that you really grapple with it.
Okay, my teachers in training, my Matt Tessel students would understand that, but I don't think my ESL students would. I don't know about what you think, if you're Raisa.
I want to add that in one of the books, Simple Isn't Easy, the title of the book is there. I came across such quotation that there is no right or wrong. Our thinking makes it so.
Oh, very good.
Two American ladies wrote this small book, pocket book, just very interesting one. I read it several times. And I like this quotation very much. This
Well, I
idea.
like that quotation, especially for an activity where you want students to give opinions.
Yeah.
And if they're doing a reading and there's a comprehension question or something, of course, there's a right or wrong answer. But when you're doing an activity or even a reading that has a question where you express your opinion, yes, exactly. You know, I may not agree with your opinion, but if you can support it, then it's not wrong. Yeah, great, thank you. And then finally, this is a tough question. If you're struggling with it, that's a good sign. Now, who will be bold and start us off? I often use an expression like that. Okay, who's going to be brave today and start? And there's usually somebody who will start us off. Okay, so again, these are things we all know. But again, I guess what I thought when I read the article was I say the same things over and over. Maybe I should think of some other ways, some other phrases to encourage these key points when of error correction. Okay, shall we go on? Okay, this is very much review, so we're going to kind of skip over it quickly. But once again, we talked, the very first thing we said was, you know, how we correct errors depends on culture, age, our background, our training, but also we have to think about the purpose of the activity. Are we focusing on accuracy or fluency? what is the age level of our students, and the proficiency of what is their proficiency. So we know explicit correction is when you actually say, no, I ate a cookie. No, you need to say ate. I ate a cookie. Very explicit. And depending on the person's personality, because I studied in France and there was so much explicit correction that I got to feel very intimidated when I was speaking French. Okay, better correction, offer 2 choices, prompt for a correct answer. We can move on. These are all ones that have been discussed in the slides. Metalinguistic feedback. When you help the students remember a rule to self-correct. So I ate too much cookies. You can count these. Elicitation, trying to get students to self-correct. I know I have used repeating the utterance and stopping at the error, and I've used rising intonation to try to draw students' attention. As I looked over the list, I think those are the 2. Well, the location of the error certainly in writing. But I think the other 2 that I mentioned are the ones I use most often in speaking classes. I don't know, do any of you have visual cues like fingers or body language that you use for error correction that you would like to share with us?
For example, tenses. If past simple had to be used and the student uses present simple or continuous, whatever. For example, I lived, I did something, you just show back.
Okay, sure. That makes good
sense. It's so
sense.
simple. Or future, like now I'm dealing with second language students, they're adults and they just do their entry level. And they do often make these mistakes. So I did something, I will do, I'm going to do.
Okay,
so,
great.
And you just show it with your hand. Or if it is the word order, so you can show it like with your fingers. Or I write 2 words, subject, predicate, and just change the pages.
Switch.
And they understand why it is in question this way or another. And it visualizes immediately.
Great. Didn't anybody, I've kind of forgotten about those. I think I've used those in the past too, but probably not as often as the ones I mentioned. Anybody else hand signals? I think in that handout I gave you on punctuation, there were a couple of hand signals to show stress or intonation. Certainly rising, falling, intonation, we can use hand signals, sure. Anybody else want to add anything? Okay, then let's move on. I'm just stretching my neck. I forgot to bring my watch here. I was trying to see how we're doing on time. I don't have it on my screen. Okay, recast. Now this is a technique that was also mentioned in the video and the handout that goes with it. It's one I found myself using a lot, but as you probably can concur, that you often recast the student's answer, but they don't get it. Or we move on and we don't give them a chance to say it again, so we don't know if they've gotten it. So again, if we recast, we should ask our students to clarify. Would you say that one more time? Could you say that again for us and see if they are using the form that we gave them? Now again, in the videos that Marina made and in the handout that goes with the videos, there are many error correction techniques. One section is headed error correction when teaching vocabulary, but you can certainly use that for any type of error correction when speaking. And then there were plenty of things. So I'm just reminding you, you can go back to those documents or to those videos and review many, many more. These are just some of the main ones that I'm going over here. Okay. Should we look at the next video then? Okay, so from correction to feedback, Sadler, Hall, and Burke tell us that feedback, however detailed, will not lead to improvement until a pupil understands both the feedback and how to use it. We all know this, and I know sometimes I've tried to write comments on students' essays in the margin, tried to be very concise, and they come back to me and say, I don't understand I don't understand why, why you said this. So, okay, well, all that writing didn't help. So we have to keep that in mind. And if perhaps at the start, if we have kind of format, feedback, making sure we instruct students in that. But there are two kinds of feedback, as you know, teacher feedback and peer feedback. And the National Capital Language Resource Center had a handout or has a website, but I didn't give you the website because it's not, I think they've changed. So I didn't give you the website where I found this document, but there was a document on peer and self-assessment, and they gave all the advantages and disadvantages of peer feedback. And one that they gave was, it is one of the ways in which students internalize the characteristics of quality work by evaluating the work of their peers. I don't know what you think about that. I don't think when I had students do peer feedback on writing that they always saw quality work. But we can learn from mistakes, as we've just said. And so I think by seeing their peers work and maybe helping giving the feedback, they can learn as well. And I think I said this the last time, it kind of gives them a gauge of where they're at. Maybe they thought they were terrible writers, and then they look at their peers writing and think, well, my writing isn't any worse than this. Or maybe they think they're wonderful writers, and then they look at a peer's writing and think, oh my gosh, this is so good. I have to work harder. So I think it can help them internalize different characteristics, maybe not always quality. The second one about students sometimes valuing or listening to the opinions of their peers more than their teachers. I don't know, what do you think about that with regard to error correction?
This is very debatable.
Yeah, I think so. I have found that they do listen. For example, I used to tell my students, okay, here's a way you can practice your English outside of the classroom. You can do this, this, and this, and they kind of roll their eyes. But when their peers tell them, oh, I went to this, I did that, then they will listen and they'll try it. So error correction, I'm not sure, but other things, doing things to help improve your language, I have found that to be true. Peer feedback is really great. And finally, that last one, that students feel grading of group projects is fairer if they're allowed to assess themselves and their partners. My students, probably because they were second language students, never complained much about group projects, but my nephew, who's not a second language student, used to always, I saw him a lot in high school, and he's like, nobody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. I'm the one who has to do everything. I hate group projects. Why do teachers give group projects? was always asking me, Sally, Aunt Sally, why do they give group projects? I actually hate them. And I don't think his teachers ever gave them. I said, do your teachers ask how well the group is working? Do they give you some kind of peer assessment? They didn't. So perhaps they will feel, students will feel it's fair if they are allowed to assess how it worked. And I'll show you a form just a bit later about how you can do that. So these are supposedly advantages of peer feedback. What do you think what would you say are some disadvantages?
I sometimes use such a way of assessing their group projects. And at first I give them a list of criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Great.
then, yeah, and then they can make it much more easier. They know what to focus their attention on while listening to the presentation. And then while presenting their project, they keep in mind in what way to do that in a better way. Yeah. You see, it is really, it helps.
Yes, and definitely if you're going to have peer feedback, you need some kind of checklist or some kind of criteria because they're students, they're not teachers. And although, you know, if you're training teachers, it might be a good activity. But yes, very important, Raisa. So if you want to show the next slide, Marina, we have what the Resource Center says may be some of the disadvantages or caveats. I mean, I think you can do peer assessment, and you'll see that in a bit at beginning levels, but then it has to be, as Raisa said, you have to give them criteria at a beginning level to assess. They say the center says that students may not take it seriously, allowing friendships, entertainment to influence their marking. I think that we might find that maybe more at the high school level. I found my university students took it seriously. It's just that they were very hesitant to criticize their classmates. They didn't want to be critical. So it's not that they didn't take it seriously, but everything was, oh, it's good, it's good. And it's like, not really. I'll look at it a little more. The second
same in Ukraine. So many students, they just don't want to offend their peers. And they're saying only good words. And that's why we need a checklist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I share my experience here?
Sure, sure.
I once reported at the conference on this. I really did a lot of peer assessment, and after that only teacher assessment using graders, of course. And we did lots of 2 modules actually of writing with one group in the first year. They were advanced level students, and they had the graders for each task with some peculiarities, etc. And they were doing peer assessment. So I did it in 3 different regimes. And first, nobody knew whose paper they were reviewing. And they had to grade and give brief feedback on each criteria. There were, it was adapted from the IELTS writing band. You can understand what criteria they are. Secondly, they knew who is going to be the evaluator, but they didn't know whose paper it is. And third, they knew each other at the third stage. And I remember my students saying, giving oral feedback again, when I asked them, how did you like this or that? They said, it's better not to know each other because we want to be friends outside the classroom. So actually, they were really strict to themselves and to others. It really built up their writing skills. They were really high-level students, and most of them did their IELTS tests after that. But they really made lots of progress with writing because they knew what to be evaluated, what is to be in focus, or what can be improved and which way. And they really did lots of progress. But as for the other side, social, yes, social links and behavior, it could be affecting them. With the other group, by the way, with the same activity, they really avoided doing any kind of, as the author puts it, discriminating remarks, yes? They said everything is okay. But I mean, those who took it seriously couldn't avoid it. Of course, you have to see and point out what's wrong, what can be improved, probably using a less sensitive language, etc. But they felt it was their feedback. They felt it easier when they didn't know the person, the name of the person, and the writer didn't know the name of the evaluator, so that it is more distracted. So
Good.
you can experiment with that.
Yes, thank you so much. That's very interesting, and I think we can all understand that. But you mentioned something, and that reminds me of this article by Doug Lemov. I think with students, when we're asking them to give peer feedback, we can also give them language for peer feedback. We can give them phrases and help them see you can be gentle giving feedback. So that would be a very good thing to give our students, unless they're, quite fair. Well, I probably would even tell my my master's students, here are some ways to do it, to be gentle in pointing out problems. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those insights. Okay, so in that, if you could go back a minute, Marina, just to slide 11. I do have 2 handouts for you. And as I mentioned last week, it seems like with every topic, something comes into my mailbox that is connected to the topic every week. So we're doing very, timely topics here. But this week, Humanizing Language Teaching, an online newsletter, and I believe Marina had an article published in that at one time, and maybe some of the rest of you have too, had an article on peer feedback in formative learning. And the article was written by a primary school teacher in Slovenia. No, it's the other one, Marina. It's an actual article. But I thought I would include that because it was primary and it was a teacher, more I'll say in your part of the world, a primary school teacher in Slovenia who talks about peer feedback and formative learning, and she gives some very specific information, and she gives a rubric in there. So you can read that when you have nothing better to do, right? But okay, not that one. That one we don't need yet. Oh, we lost Marina. Not yet.
Sorry, yeah.
That's
I
okay.
was muted, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. So we have...
I will put everything on the website so that you could download from there.
Yeah, we don't need this one yet. This is coming out. So with that last slide, we had the article on formative feedback in primary school in Slovenia. And then I did include a student peer assessment form for group work, for like a group project. It's just an example of how you could have students give peer feedback on their participation in the group as well as the other group members. So you can take a look at that when we put that up later, when Marina puts it up. Okay.
Okay, I was thinking about showing them. Yeah, so, okay.
Yeah, well, you could show them too, although we did, that article is just,
Yeah.
there's not a lot.
So the handouts will be like this, on peer feedback, informative learning, and that's a great article, yeah.
Yeah, and she does give it, I think she gives a template with her right here, right there is her, not template, her rubric with criteria and how she does it at the elementary level. So I found that really helpful to see, yes, this can be done at the primary level. Okay, so that's the article you can read when you have the time or if you feel like it.
Yeah, and for student peer assessment.
Yeah, so here's a form that I contributed to my group success by, so it's reflective on the top, and then on the bottom, you have a rubric where they get to rate how the group worked as a group. Okay, thank you. All right, we talked about error correction a bit in speaking, and we'll do just a bit in writing. We've already talked about the process writing approach. And the main thing about the process writing approach is that it asks students to do multiple drafts of the same piece of writing. That's the main thing. That's why it's called a process. And if you do use the process approach, it gives the opportunity for feedback on content and organization. I think last week we had someone who said, well, I need to teach the style and the style. You can still teach those styles with process writing. And that first draft gets feedback on content and organization. And then if we have our students rewrite, then we give them feedback on grammar. And we always say there's no reason to give feedback on grammar in the first draft. If we're going to say, this sentence doesn't support, take it out. Or you need more support, you need more description, put it in. So it doesn't really make any sense to go through grammar at that point. So if you use the process approach, it actually gives you places where you can give teacher or student feedback. I think trying to bridge our grammar class or our grammar instruction, maybe you don't have a whole grammar, but your grammar instruction with the writing, so that students can be held accountable for the grammar they are learning or have learned in class. And then one way to do that is to give the grammar you've taught some kind of editor's symbol, so that you don't have to write out, you need a verb here. You can just put V for verb. And use those symbols when marking a piece of writing rather than just correcting the students, because again, just correcting it for them does not help them understand what the problem is. Again, in the videos and the handouts that Marina has given, there's lots of information on marking writing. There's variations on traditional teacher marking by Jim Scrivener. You can go back and refresh your memory by reading those or listening to the videos for more ideas on error correction. Okay. And as I touched on last week very hurriedly, I am a great believer in proofreading. I used to be told, when I was a student in elementary school, high school, teachers would say, did you proofread before handing this in? But I'm a believer of giving our students 5 minutes, or if possible, more, to proofread their assignment before they hand it in. And then we talked about mistakes and errors. They should be able to find mistakes if they're proofreading carefully. And if you have the time, you should be able to allow, and this is what happens when I give students time to proofread. They call me over and they say, Sally, I don't know if this is right. Well, then that's an error. They're not quite sure. And so there I can explain, well, when you do, I can explain the grammar and help them make the correction. So again, proofreading is not like other reading. students are not reading the content. They're looking at the grammar very slowly and word by word. I always ask students to point at the word with a pencil when they're reading to get main ideas, and just don't do that. But for proofreading, to slow themselves down, please do that. And then they can see, oh, she make, no, she make, no, there should be an S there. So another way to slow people down is to read sentences backwards. And one thing that I like doing very much, but it requires a little more time than 5 minutes, is to have students work with a partner and read their paper slowly out loud. And why do I like having them do this? Is because often the partners can say, oh, look, there's a problem there. And again, I give them the language. I tell them, don't correct it for your partner. Tell them there's a problem there. Can you see it? And if they can't see it, then the partner, if the partner knows the correction, the partner can help them. And then a very different way of proofreading is to give your students a checklist of common errors that they make at their level and have them look at the error and then scan their paper. Okay, third person singular. Look for all the third person singular verbs. You can give them the item and they can scan for it. So I have 2 handouts for you here. Error correction guides.
Just let me show it. Yes. So because I'm looking at it and I don't see it. I don't see how to share it. So okay. So this one is on proofreading.
Yeah, this is one that I have never used. This is one that I think they used in upper elementary levels. And I thought it was very different from the other ones I had, so I included it. It gives, yeah, it's just a way. Of course, you go over this beforehand, make sure students understand it, but then they can use this to help proofread. This one also, okay, now this one is the one, yeah, if you could back up a little bit. Can you back up a little bit, Marina?
Just a second.
Sorry. This is a series, and these
Okay, this way. Yeah.
these are handouts either I and or my colleague Jean Kirschman have used. So this is what all the writing teachers in our writing program at Hawaii Pacific University used to try to help students correct their own grammars. So grammar mistakes or errors. So we would put the marking above the problem and with the explanation. And when we first handed this sheet out, we gave them the next sheet, Marina, if you can go down there. Okay, so you actually see Jean Kirschman's name on it. We gave them scribbled in there from many years ago. We actually gave them an activity to do to try to understand what they had to do, to look at the form beforehand, try to understand how to make the change. So this is a worksheet to go with the previous error correction sheet to just try to get students used to the notations, the editor's symbols. Okay. This next sheet I never used, but it was one from a textbook where teacher has students number the lines in their writing. So line 1, line 2, and maybe leave a space between a line between each line. And then where there's a problem, you put line 1 or, need a singular, line 2. It's a different way of marking. I didn't like it. I thought it was a little confusing, but it is another way instead of some people are very strong believers that they shouldn't put a lot on a student's paper on their writing. It's just overwhelming to see all these notations. So this is another way of pointing out problems with the paper.
Mhm.
Here is, this again is Jean's, and her students were making these kinds of mistakes. And so she had a checklist that she gave them, and they would proofread using the checklist. So first of all, verbs, scan the paper, scan the paragraph. She had her students do a lot of paragraphs. She had a class with students who struggled with writing. So they did a lot of paragraphs and they used the checklist, and then they checklist, and then they kept track of what the assignment was on top, how many errors they had, so they could see where they were really having a lot of problems. And then she would give them more work on that. So these are just some forms that we actually used in our programs, our writing programs at Hawaii Pacific University. Okay.
Mhm.
And that last on the bottom, I should have pointed this out when we were talking about writing, but this writing center, which is another thing most American universities have, where students can go and get help on writing. But this writing center at the University of North Carolina has a website that's just incredible. And so they have a very good section on editing and proofreading that you can look at, but I would also recommend you just look at the whole site, because there's so much on there that's really useful, probably as a teacher and to your students. So again, they do have this whole, they call it a handout on editing and proofreading, and giving instructions. And now this is not a website for ESL teachers. This is for all university teachers. So, or maybe I did find it in English language. Maybe I'm lying to you. I don't know. Tips and tools, I guess, is where it is. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Is it 7:53 there?
Yeah, it's 7:57.
7:57.
Yeah, yeah.
Yikes. Okay.
Mhm.
I have never tried this, but I read about it and I went to the site and checked it. Cambridge University has a free online writing feedback app. Again, I haven't tried it, but you might want your students to give it a try. They give the assignment, they give the writing assignment depending on the student's level. And then the student submits the writing and they get feedback. Again, it might just be something you could have students try and tell you what they thought. Was it useful, helpful? Just another idea there.
Mhm.
Let's move on to assessment. And I'm sorry, we spent too much time, I guess, on the first, on Doug
Oh,
Leonard.
it was okay, yeah, so.
Yeah, we know that we have formative assessment throughout the term and summative at the end. And in Marina's videos and handout, she gives many different types of assessment, kinds of assessment. If we go on to the next slide. What they are telling us in language learning literature about effective assessment is that we have to clearly identify the purpose of the assessment. And I'm glad Raisa mentioned criteria, because we need to decide what learning or criteria is to be assessed. Then we're also told that each criterion should be weighted. In other words, how important is it? How much? All things are not equal. right? So how much weight should it carry in the final grade? Okay, so how much is each criterion worth for the final part? And again, to select instruments that match what the learning goals of the program are. The next slide. I see another mistake. I didn't change that to blue. We have a black side. So now, as far as criteria, I would give that if I were asking my students, you know, if one of the criteria was a unified, clear, attractive appearance, I would take off nothing for one slide. Okay. So they're telling us we should use multiple measures, not just a one-time test and that's it. You're in or out. And also they say, depending on the type of exam, design it so it not only tests but teaches. In other words, if possible, go over the exam for positive washback. Okay. And then very much in almost all of our classes that I taught at Hawaii Pacific University, they wanted us to use rubrics. And of course, there's holistic and analytic rubrics. The holistic are much easier to make with more general criteria. The analytic are really looking at each type of criteria, but they allow for a more objective and consistent evaluation. They say. I think with writing, there's so much objectivity that to have a rubric is good. It helps it helps push us a little more towards objective, I think, than to just read this. Oh, this is good. This is bad. We know this even when we read articles or our colleagues' work. You know, well, anyway, it's very objective what one person thinks is good writing and the other thinks. So rubric is good. Also, if we show students a rubric beforehand, then they understand what the criteria is that they have to meet, what our expectations are. So they can provide us also with feedback on our teaching. If everybody is not doing well in this one section of the rubric, then whose fault is it? And we can also use rubrics if we are doing the writing process, for example, and they have several essays throughout the term, we can see, are they improving in these different areas? So it's a way of measuring and documenting progress. Why did I get this final grade? Well, let's take a look at your 4 essays that you wrote during the term, and then your final essay. So I have a handout here for you as well. This is a kind of long one, and it was from an online webinar by Deborah Cruzan, which I wish she could give for you. It was quite good. And are we able to pull that one up, Marina?
This one?
Okay. Yeah, and if you just leave it where it is, I left it just as she gave it to us, because she gives you an essay and she says, the essay is a response to a no longer used prompt on a timed writing placement test. Students taking the test would be placed into one of 3 second language writing options. So this is very common. This is the way our program was. Students came into our program and they took a writing test. It was timed writing. they were given a prompt, and here's the prompt. Imagine that you have a friend from your home country who is preparing to visit the United States for the first time. In a well-developed essay, describe the advice you would offer him or her. What would you tell your friend to expect, etc. So this is a type of writing prompt that would be very common in our program as well. So she gave that to the participants and wanted us to read it beforehand and wanted us to assess it using this holistic rubric, and then to discuss together why we gave it the score we did. And so I thought for this week's task, reflective task, one interesting thing for you might be to read that essay and just decide how you would assess it and why. Okay, so that's there. And then if you go down, she gives a lot of instruction or information on using rubrics, the different kinds of rubrics. So it was a whole webinar, and I've been to another workshop on rubrics, and they're very common here. I would say I always made rubrics for my speaking and my writing classes. They weren't easy to make, even after attending this webinar and doing the workshop, but I think it's worthwhile to help the students feel that there is a modicum of objectivity in the grading, and to know in advance what they're being graded on. Is this it, or does it continue, Marina, this handout? Is there more to it?
Let me see. Yeah, there is.
Yeah, so she gives you some ideas for making rubrics. Anyway, this is something, again, you can look at if you are interested in it. Yeah, she goes into primary traits, and I haven't gone back and checked these websites, so I'm sorry, I'm not sure if they're still active because this webinar was a while ago. Okay, thank you. I did include, and again, I have not used this, but there are online rubric makers.
I was surprised with it. Like, look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't used them, but there is a free membership for this one. And there may even be others, but these are the two I've heard of. So again, if you're interested in this and interested in having a little help with making rubrics, you might look into this or try this. So I think on that note, I will end unless somebody would like to ask questions or contribute something more to this.
If I can,
Yes.
again, from my practice and what I was reading on that. So if you give different assignments, you have to adapt your rubrics to a particular assignment. It is not one rubric for all pieces of writing, for example. If they write a letter, or they write a report, or they write an invitation email, or they write a persuasive essay, or a different type of essay. So rubrics have to be different because it's not just introduction, main body, conclusion. Yes, the structure.
Yes,
there is content. There are specific things within the main body, or even in the introduction. There are specific lexical units, vocabulary, and the whole idea, and only then grammar comes like secondary, probably even important, but not main. Yes. So I mean that you have to make it clear. So there are general rules. Of course, it depends on the level of students, but when you introduce general rules and get them acquainted step by step to using the rubrics as they are, you have to give an assignment and then explain it, and then set these criteria for them to understand what they have to meet. And the rubrics should be different.
Yes, thank you.
Or
for
adapted, at least.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And as I said, I use them for writing and performance talk, performance speaking, for speeches or group projects. I would always use a rubric for grading. But yes, thank you. We definitely need to change them, which is part of the challenge to, and I mean, you start and you probably refine it each time after you see how it works with your students' work. But thank you for bringing that up, pointing that out. Anything else?
I have a question. It's about multiple drafts. It's about number of them, possible or potential number of multiple drafts. The first one is progressive feedback. Yeah, just it's about improving content and organization. The second one from the slide in the information, they rewrite and then they get feedback on grammar. And just there can be two feedbacks, two possibilities to rewrite, or even or maybe more.
Well, it depends on the time you have in class. Well, for example, our master students have to do a portfolio. And some of them rewrite 5, 6 times. They get feedback from 3 professors. But in my writing classes, for example, I just did not have the time to do a lot of them. So I did, yes, first draft that got feedback on content and organization. Then the students rewrote. Second, they handed me a second draft with that first draft so I could see the changes. And then I would mark grammar. And then they did proofreading, they did grammar exercises, then they would get it back. And then they would rewrite a final draft and hand that in. They would proofread it on the day they handed it in. They could still make changes. And then that was it. So 3 drafts, I said. Yeah, so that was all I could do because we had paragraph writing, summary writing, and then we had 4 major essays before the final exam. And I'll just say let me just say quickly, because at the beginning of every academic year, we sat down with colleagues and read essays like from previous semester and talked about, we had our rubric, but we read them just like that webinar. We read them, we gave them a grade, and then we talked how we norming sessions. How much were we on the same track? Because we had several sections of writing. So you'd often hear students say, I'm going to take that professor because he's so easy. So we would norm and try to explain to each other, how we got the grade and why we thought it was that grade, and tried to get more even in our grading, even with the rubrics. And then at the end of the semester, we had a final in-class essay. The students were given 1 hour to write it. And then they did not put their names on top. They were given a number. I gave them a number, and then I wrote down the number and the name. And then I gave those essays to a colleague who was teaching the same class. And he would, or she would not write on the papers, but on a separate paper, grade them. And then I didn't look at that, and I would grade them, and then I would look at both. And if there was something that was really, really far apart, then we had to look at it again and see where we were at. So this was our attempt.
Yeah, I like this idea that you negotiate all the criteria, all the rubrics. Well,
Yeah.
and it is really very good because then everyone just uses the same information. Yeah, just the same demands are the same.
That's right. And to, again, trying to get this, trying to have the students feel that what we were doing was based on what they had done, their work, not them, not their personality.
Really clear structure, yeah, a clear assessment. Yeah,
Takes
thank you,
time,
Sally.
takes a lot of time, but I mean, you just keep working on it and it gets, it eventually takes less time
But
as
it's
far as
actually-
making the rubrics and the norming and such. But as far as your question on drafts, yeah, I had 3 drafts.
It's really worth spending time on it. Huh? Yeah, just it's about you know it, name it knowing session, but it is really a good idea.
Well, it was really interesting too, to find out, you know, sometimes we just, well, I don't think that's that important because I don't think this, you know, and so helping one another understand too, because we all are strong in certain areas and have our weaknesses in others. So helping each other grow.
If I can add,
Thank you for this. Yes, Helena.
if I can add about grading criteria, in one institution especially, if teachers or lecturers or whoever work in the same institution, so it would be clear, like clear and transparent to the students if they have the same grading criteria. So we have kind of standardizing sessions, intake for teachers, first of all, like in assessing our external examination papers, yes, when they have all been trained to apply, probably first negotiate this criteria, the graders, and then apply, like do a training session to discuss what is the mark, why is it this or that grade, etc. And then bring that things to their students in different groups or classes or whatever. And students then, because they also communicate, they're not isolated. And they understand that if you get 1 mark in one group or from one teacher and you have a better or worse mark from another teacher, they are unhappy about that.
Right.
But if they understand it is fair, so because everyone focuses on this thing or that thing, on structure or language or format or whatever, yes? And they also communicate, it's not only teachers. And it would be easier for you as a teacher then, or for you as examiner, yes, examination board as a whole, or a person, individual, to communicate that message to students. And they will be trained, actually. They will accept it.
Yes, thank you. Yes, there are many, many reasons to put the effort into this, I think, to make it, as you said, clear and transparent, and make everyone feel that they're on the same plane when it comes to grading.
This information is very useful, not only for novice teachers, but for those who are not novice.
I told Sally before the session, that for me, it was so much new that it's not refreshing, it's learning. Yeah.
Well, that's good. And I, you know, there's so much like the rubrics and the proofreading that I've attended webinars. I've actually, Jean Kirschman, I have given conference presentations on proofreading. We've done a lot on research and created a lot of materials. There's just, I mean, almost every one of these topics we could spend an hour at least, if not more on. So, so it's always a challenge for me to try to figure out what to include here. And anyway, maybe in the future, if you want webinars or whatever, maybe we can go back and not necessarily from me, but from other people, find someone who could give a webinar on this topic or that topic, because there are so many. You can spend, as I said, a whole hour.
Sally, I have an idea. Just the task is to write a reflection on each session, and just the topics. We certainly choose different points to reflect on, and then you can use the information from our reflection, from our reviews, and just maybe then we'll get a very interesting list of ideas, or just some recommendations, or somebody's experience, negative or positive, but shared experience is very, very useful.
Well, thank you. That might be a good idea, Marina, just maybe not even a reflection, but a kind of assessment at the end of this, asking people, what was useful, what wasn't, what they would like more information on, and to move forward with that.
Like a feedback form.
Exactly.
Yeah, we remember that there are two types, if I'm not mistaken, hot feedback and cold feedback. Hot feedback, just immediate one, and cold feedback maybe at the very end of the course.
Well, that's true. I mean, as time distances us from the event, we start to change our feelings about it. So.
It sounds like revenge, you know.
Well, we've avoided the hot feedback for the most part. We'll get the cold feedback later. But I thank you for your participation today, such good comments and questions, and
Thank you.
so we have one more session next week.